Good morning, everyone. I am Richard Osmus, and this is a training that we do every other week, featuring important areas that we need to learn and practice. And we are in deep training or learning in order to be really effective in this election. Today's topic is really important for me, which is the how to be strategic. Some believe that every action should begin with the question, what's our strategy? Could be what's our purpose, but strategy also, I believe, addresses how to navigate position things in order to be more effective towards an action or a purpose. So when I thought of that and I asked around, Jared, this is not just me, I asked around, who's the powerful or effective strategist? It even came from Columbus. Well, it didn't come from Washington, but I didn't ask in Washington who's the most effective strategist. And but around Cincinnati, your name came up. I did a mini survey, and your name came up most frequently as a strategist. So Jared is the founder and leader of Rivertown Strategies. And so we're asking Jared if he would be willing to do that right away. He said, yeah, would he be willing to do this with us? So this is, as most of you know that have been with our sessions before, this is participative. I'm not expecting Jared, although take off and run with things, Jared, if you wish, but to make it more conversational and participative is part of the style of Bold New Democracy. So is in a kind of an old tradition, since I'm an old guy, I get the privilege of asking the first question to kind of launch. So we can do biography, which we'll get to, but this is so much in my heart and my face, like it is for all of us. In light of racism and racial tensions, and the relationship of authority, including police, with the more vulnerable in the African American in our culture. How does strategy, thinking of campaigns and we as activists, what's the strategy? What's the way to begin thinking and handling this that could be effective, in your opinion, Jared?
That's a loaded question right off the bat, Richard.
I know, that's what I like.
Loaded. Yep, loaded.
It's not loaded. It's a let's get right to the heart of the matter.
Fair enough. Look, the role that I play and the obligation I have to our clients is to help them win. And one of the constant kind of back and forths that candidates and campaigns have to weigh is where do you lead on your own values and beliefs, and where do you meet voters where they are? We don't get to choose what voters care about. Almost 90% of the time, they're going to tell us what they care about, and we have to lead on that issue. And everything that's been happening in the last several weeks, beginning with the situation in Georgia through now, is you are seeing candidates want to lead and figuring out how to lead in shining a light on institutional racism and constant injustices that for generations, especially in the Black community, but all communities of color, fell toward public safety and law enforcement. But at the end of the day, we also have to acknowledge the reality that candidates are running in districts or constituencies that, there are people who see rioting and looting and, other forms of protest that aren't quite as nonviolent, and are expecting those same leaders and candidates to condemn that action and to want to say that we're going to keep you safe no matter where you live, whether it's Township or Mason or Hyde Park or even Avondale or Bond Hill or Roselawn. And so it's a constant tug of war where candidates have to be able to clearly signal to their base, for lack of a better term, that they kind of have the empathy and understanding to hear what folks are saying and acknowledge the real like systemic issues, but also be able to acknowledge the very real concerns and anger that folks have about violent responses to that.
Mhm.
That's not an easy thing to do. The person who figures that out going to be elected president of the United States at some point, and so it's a
Mhm.
constant tug of war to be able to strike that balance. It's hard. It's very
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah. The balance is the key because that is more integrating that way. Who is next? You can ask background informations to learn more about Jared's emergence to be a strategic leader and have his own company as a young guy, or to ask follow up on this, or go anywhere that you wish. I'd also like to ask one person to kind of follow the chat, because as facilitator, it's difficult for me to feel right on the edge of what's being shared and to watch who's ready to engage with Jared and also watch chats. Would someone volunteer to watch the chats and then pop in? Everybody knows what chat is, I think, from here. You can type in a question. You can also just raise your hand where a group is not so big that we can't just raise a hand or talk in. I don't like too many people talking on top of each other, of course. But who would be willing to follow the chat and then speak up about that every few minutes or 5 minutes? So thank you, Mary Carol. You are a great chat follower from other sessions we've had. Thank you so much. Now, who's next to learn from Jared? This is our chance to learn from his experience and his perspective.
I'm here. This is Ruth. I'm just curious what you use for balance. How do you personally get yourself balanced? Because, that's the only real power we have, in a sense. What do you use, Jared?
Well, that's a good question. I would say, candidly, I have to remove emotion from everything I do in terms of how we advise candidates. Certainly, I have feelings and emotions and reactions, especially in times right now where tensions are running high. But our clients expect us to be able to give them dispassionate advice and be able to help them chart a path through kind of all the cloud of emotions. And so I've had to essentially just get used to putting emotions aside when need be, and trying to look at the lay of the land in terms of demographics and numbers and polling data and other kind of research that we have available to us to help put them on the best track possible. But it's hard. I mean, there were a lot of mistakes I made early on in my career where I wasn't able to set aside those kinds of emotions. And it's something that I'm constantly having to recalibrate on, but it's important if we're going to serve our clients as best as possible.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yes, Marie.
Hi, my question is about how do you message when you want to tell facts to people while they don't believe in facts? And right now, because we are dealing with vote by mail issues, how do you, without emotion, that's a very good point, thank you for that. How do you basically try to tell people that vote by mail is secure and they don't believe in facts?
Yeah, I think that's a good question too. That's also pretty difficult. You guys brought some good ones this morning. But I think it's important for us to take a step back and understand that while there are a large number and unfortunately increasing number of people that are just impervious to facts and reason, the overwhelming majority of people, both like-minded individuals like us on this call, but also just kind of others that aren't really politically engaged and kind of go about their own day without politics really ever entering to the forefront of their mind, aren't necessarily that impervious to facts. And so I think we have to understand when we're putting our time and energy towards something, there are some folks that are lost causes, and that's just an unfortunate reality. It's our job to break through that and find folks that, which quite frankly, it's a larger number, but a larger number of folks that are willing to listen and willing to understand it. And I think the best way to do it is through modeling the behavior. When we have elected leaders who vote by mail, when we have trusted community leaders, whether that's faith leaders, whether that's folks who are very well connected within a certain neighborhood or community, who are willing to demonstrate that, hey, I trust voting by mail, and you should too. It goes a long way toward people who are willing to be exposed to something that's different than what they're used to, and be willing to understand that, hey, this is a safe practice. This isn't something I need to be afraid of.
Thank you. Yes, Caroline.
I have a question for you, Jared. I feel like there is a lot of burnout and overturn in the field of organizing and just politics in general. What fuels you to do the work that you do? Is it anger? Is it love? What is it there, that really keeps you going? And how do you prevent burnout?
How do I prevent burnout? I say this as I'm sitting in my office on a Saturday morning. I do think you have to be willing to turn it off every once in a while. Like I don't watch cable news in my house. I don't. I try to. I have hobbies that are not necessarily that interesting or abnormal, but I love sports. I love the teams that I root for, and I find a lot of refuge in caring about those things, and it helps. And the rate of turnover is hard. It's not necessarily new. Organizing, as everyone on this call knows, is painstaking, hard work, and the victories don't come enough, and the ones that do come sometimes feel like half measures or only small steps, and that does take a toll on people. I think what's worked for me is being able to understand that where this is a long game we're playing, and while we have important elections this fall, and we're going to have important elections fall after and the fall after, we have to keep our eye on the prize. And especially in Cincinnati, what has happened in the past 5, 6, 7 election cycles in Hamilton County, the place is now unrecognizable for when most of us probably got involved or started. And that's because it's because many people and many organizers and many campaigns put in the hard work. And we went from being a county that in 2006, Jared Brown won Ohio by 18 points and lost Hamilton County. In 2018, Jared Brown won the state of Ohio, but by 6 points, won Hamilton County by 15 points. So we were at least 20 points to the right of the state in 2006, and now we're at least 10 points to the left. That's a 30-point swing in 12. That's amazing. In 2016 was the first time that a Democrat won Hamilton County and lost Ohio statewide. That was Hillary, obviously, and certainly it's not the outcome we wanted. But if you're going to look for silver linings, that's never happened since Lincoln, and that's the work of organizers, folks on this call, and countless others that many of us don't even know who have done that. So you have to look at it through the prism of this is a marathon, not a sprint, even though it feels like we're constantly running at a sprint's pace. But that's at least how I keep myself a little bit grounded in all of it.
Great. Thank you, Jared.
Thank you.
Yes, Chuck.
Jared, with door-to-door canvassing not being part of the equation right now, what are you telling people like us that we really should concentrate on?
That's another good question. I think leveraging relationships that you have in your own networks is critical. Right now people are not necessarily thinking a ton about politics. They're thinking about you know, whether or not they're going to still have their job. They're thinking about whether or not they're going to be able to go, you know, on a summer vacation that they saved for. And it's important to remember that, like, with the exception of a small percentage of us, politics becomes relevant only much later in an election cycle. And I think figuring out where you can be communicating to your friends and neighbors and colleagues and family and, you know, folks that you have any sort of relationship with, and let them know why this is important, and why the same anxieties or fears that they have about, you know, pandemic and the economy, or, you know, everything that's happening right now with the George Floyd situation, that it's all directly connected to politics, and that this is an outlet that folks can use to, you know, express their fears or anxiety, and especially for those that want to make change. Right now it's tough because there's not a whole lot of actions we can ask of them. But I think just, you know, whatever you can be doing to be doing organizing virtually, whether it's through social media or email or even just texting people. I mean, this Zoom meeting is a great example of, you know, obviously this is predating the pandemic, but something that people probably are looking for now is a connection with folks that are feeling the same way they are. And taking the opportunity to organize in your own networks and communities is an important way to do that, especially right now.
Thank you, Jared. And Mary Carol, do we have any questions?
We have 2 questions in chat. The first one is, I think, something that all candidates struggle with. You know, how do you manage the tension between wanting to communicate your own positive message and then versus calling out kind of the negativity that is inevitably going to come your way from your opponent? That's the first question.
Yeah. All right. So that one's tough. I mean, you're always going to be the brunt of a negative attack. And what I always tell candidates is, if you are receiving a negative attack, especially if it's an outright falsehood or lie, it's a good sign. It means you're doing something right. It means you don't have substance to beat you on. So take the fact that it's happening as a source of confidence and strength. Secondly, you don't want to amplify the attack message by repeating it. You know, if someone says you have 3 heads and then you say, my opponent likes to say I have 3 heads, all you're doing is reminding people that you might have 3 heads, even if you don't. So you don't want to amplify their message. I have no problem with calling out lies and falsehoods. I don't think you call them out specifically, and I think you always tie it back to your own values. Folks who, you know, want to. Oftentimes, the genesis of an attack ad is either because folks need to distract from an overall message. That means you're gaining traction, or something you're saying is working or clicking with people, or they just need something to try to make you less popular or less persuasive. Getting down in the mud almost never works, and so it usually I would encourage candidates to stay above it. Now, there's some obvious, you know, exceptions to that, but if you're able to take whatever kind of attention that you're going to get, if someone's putting a negative attack out on you, and the press is coming to say, hey, how do you react to this? How do you respond to this? Just pivot right back into your message. It's the whole reason that they were attacking you in the first place, is because your message is working. Getting down into the mud usually ends up being a win for the other guy, because it allows, you know, the headline to get written, you know, candidate A and candidate B running nasty campaigns. Even if you're just responding to a falsehood, you're going to get lumped in as running a nasty campaign. So the best thing you can do is just pivot back into your message and say, look, I'm not gonna engage and dignify with a response to these outright falsehoods. What I am here to talk about is X, Y, and Z, whatever, you know, is the most important message for you and your campaign.
Could I give a counter view here, Jared?
Please.
And I'm interested in your view. Some of us here, more than a few, I think, are being influenced by David Plouffe, the campaign organizer for Obama in the 07, 08, and I believe some in 12 as well. And he has a book out, The Citizen's Guide to Beating Donald Trump. And many of us have read that, and there's very specific strategies and tactics in his book that he feels is really important to beating Donald Trump. One of his big ones that's influenced us is what he calls fighting the smear, and that we need to not avoid. We need to set up, and they also have to let activists know what the facts are around the smear. And some of us that were this group evolved from work group for FTEB, back then. It seems a long time ago, but and of course some of the smears there, and we were frustrated because we didn't know all the facts all the time in what the smears were, but people we were engaging with were claiming those to be truths. And we said, well, they're not true, but to have just facts, not to get into arguments. But I liked Pluff's idea of fight the smear, have a different website or a place where you just put the facts around the situation, and then the activists and volunteers and campaign workers can have something specific. What's your response to Pluff's idea?
Well, he's right, but I think it's important to distinguish between like a presidential campaign where the constant kind of sparring back and forth is going to be at the top of, news coverage, is going to be at the top of social media dialogue, as opposed to like more local or regional campaigns where it's not the case. With a smaller campaign, a down ballot race, you usually only have a few opportunities to really engage your opponent in a way that is going to receive outsized coverage or attention.
Right.
We also, in a presidential campaign, have two candidates that are going to have 100% name ID, and people are going to be able to make opinions about them based on things other than
Good point.
what they say. And so, in a case like Trump, I think you absolutely let everything that he says get contested. And I think people know that most of the time when he says something, it's either an outright lie or at the very best, it's misleading. On a local level and on a regional, when you're looking at congressional races or countywide races, you don't really have A, the same bandwidth, and B, for the most part, opponents aren't quite as sociopathic as Donald Trump is. And, when you're looking at how you engage with attacks on your own campaign, you're only going to get a handful of times we're going to get media attention. We're going to get the opportunity to rally folks. We're going to get the opportunity to really build enthusiasm and awareness around your campaign. And if people are only kind of tuning in for, brief spurts here and there, what you want to avoid is making it look like you're part of a negative, nasty campaign, because that drives everyone's negatives down. And as we've seen with the Trump-Clinton election, when both candidates have low approval ratings, usually the Republican does better. And so we want to make sure that, like, if you look at just the voters who had a negative opinion of both Hillary and Donald Trump, they broke for Trump 2-1.
Wow.
And we need to make sure that, like, on a local level, we don't fall into that same trap.
Yeah, good. Terrific. Thank you. Is there another question, Mary Carol?
Yep, we have several. So the next question up was, what advice do you have for young people who really want to be engaged and want to do something, but are a little bit timid in nature, haven't done a lot of this yet? Sort of some ways that they might feel connected to the political process a little bit better.
Yeah, that's a great question. Don't wait to be asked. Dive in and do the work. If there's a candidate or a cause that you believe in, just jump right in. You would be surprised on campaigns where, how kind of quickly you can rise through the ranks just by showing up and willing to do hard work. And, the way I looked at it when I was in college and started to get involved in politics is, you can either be a small fish in a big pond, work on a large race, a presidential or Senate race, and be kind of a cog in the machine, or you can be a big fish in a small pond, work on a small local race and, be the campaign manager, be, the lead volunteer. I chose the latter route. I chose to go be a campaign manager on a Cincinnati City Council race in my first job out of college. but neither is wrong. It's just a matter of what feels right to you. But I think the overarching commonality is go get involved. Don't wait to be asked for help. Don't wait to be asked for, a volunteer shift or to come into the office. Just do it. If you lean into it, put in the work and show that you're willing to do what it takes, you will find yourself, being involved at a much higher level very quickly.
Yeah, good.
Great
How about
answer.
some of the other young ones here that are active in campaigns? I'm thinking of Caroline or Mark. How does, let's see, are there others? Mary Carol, of course, young person getting
Yeah,
involved.
I'm like the youngest person here.
Right, you are. But for you, how did you jump in, Caroline? From Jared's recommendation is just jump in and decide what level you want to be in. How did that happen for you?
I started my freshman year of college was 2016, and I was a volunteer with the Hillary Clinton campaign. And then after that, I worked on a city council race where I met Jared. He was also working on that city council. Well, I was an intern and he was a consultant, but Jared was on that race as well. So, once you get the ball rolling, it really opens up a field of possibilities. The political world here is small. So any way you can jump in and show that you care about making our county or our city or this district better, people will notice. And it's just only going to open up more opportunities for you to get involved. So just get your foot in the door, however you feel comfortable, however you feel like your skills are being used. People will notice and admire your work.
Yeah, and now to be the field director for
Great
one of the
answer.
major congressional races here, of course, but in the country, it's being recognized as one of the real flip congressional races. So congratulations.
Yeah, no pressure, right?
Yeah, that's good. How about you, Mark? How did you jump in as Jared's describing?
Right. Well, the first thing I would add to from a campaign perspective is that there is such a need for people to get involved, no matter what skill set you bring to the table. So if you're looking to get involved, there will be room for you. I got involved pretty similar to how other folks have, sort of hard work. So I interned for Denise Treehouse in 2016. And then I jumped on to a city council race in 2017. And I accomplished that by messaging my candidate on Facebook and setting up a coffee meeting. So it's really about, getting yourself out there and, just showing up, kind of like Jared said, and doing the work.
Right. And that's a carryover to activists.
Yeah.
One is to be a professional, and then the other is to be to step in that way. Another young one that I am excited to be connecting more with now is Chris Harding. And thanks for turning on your video, Chris. How about you? You're jumping in as a young guy, because this is so crucial to those of us that aren't young. We need you. What was your step? Did you jump in like Jared's describing?
Yeah, I mean, I got started pretty early. Is my audio working?
Yeah.
I jumped on AFTAB's campaign in 2018 and worked communications and opera research there, and then just kind of continued to work in local campaigns when I could, and did some work for the county and Issue 7 most recently. So yeah, I mean, kind of the same thing. Like I just reached out to folks that, I knew also working in this space to kind of, what can I do? How can I be helpful? Put in some time volunteering, because a lot of times, as we know, that's what you have to do to get started. So, that's kind of how I found my avenue and working through Cincinnati. So.
And Chris is from Portland, Oregon originally. And I like to tell him many here in the Midwest have Portland, Oregon envy. I love Portland and to go there. And here's this young guy who's from Portland, Oregon, and he comes to Cincinnati. And is it fair to say, Chris, that you've fallen in love with the city, the politics, the people?
Oh, I love Cincinnati. I mean, having gone to Xavier, fell in love with the city. I loved exploring OTR, just the beautiful history and culture you guys have here. So, I mean, I feel, now I'm over in Clifton and close to the Ludlow little district area, and it's just a little slice of Portland. I love it. So, yeah, I feel very at home here.
Good.
Yeah.
And Richard, there's also Ethan.
Yeah, I was
Nichols.
just going to say Ethan is on there too. Ethan is,
Yeah,
I would consider
Ethan.
him one of the young people.
Sure. Yeah. Ethan is going into his senior year of high school. He looks so mature and acts in so much wisdom. I was shocked when I learned that is a young guy, Ethan. What about for you, jumping in?
Yeah, I started out volunteering for Hillary's campaign. Well, first for Bernie's campaign and then for Hillary's, as well as for Ted Strickland's campaign. So I was one of Ted Strickland's volunteers here in Cincinnati, doing all of his yard sign work, helping out with that through the Hamilton County office. And then I worked in 2017. I volunteered for Derek Bauman and Brian Gary's campaigns for City Council, so helped out with that. And then 2018, when I started Students for Gun Legislation, I also got involved with Cincinnati Indivisible, and I co-founded Ohio Climate Strike. And then 2019 was when I kind of got more involved on local races when I was Marlena Brookfield's campaign manager with her school board campaign in 2019. And then I worked briefly, I think January till the primary for Gabe Davis. I was a field organizer for his campaign. So I was one of 4 field organizers that worked primarily. I worked primarily like Norwood, Avondale areas, and then Clifton as well. And those were kind of my neighborhoods that I focused on.
So inspiring. Thank you, Ethan.
Yeah.
It's just so great. Mary Carol, how did you as a young woman jump in?
Oh, well, okay. I wasn't raising my hand for that, but I will say a couple of things. First of all, everything that has been talked about goes for any age person who's never been engaged or involved. That showing up, volunteering. I grew up in a political family. My dad, I was doing canvassing probably at 8 years old. And those days we used to just hang things on doors and get into neighborhoods. My dad was a campaign manager for former Governor Gilligan in his governor's race and his congressional race. So, you know, for us, we laugh about it that the fall was football season in most families, and our family, it was campaign season. So worked on Kennedy's campaigns. I mean, literally. And then there was kind of a hiatus when I was raising my kids and we moved around the country. But I never stopped being involved in the political process. I didn't necessarily work on campaigns all the time. And when I retired, I specifically retired for the purpose of being able to dive in full force in working on campaigns. And AFTABS was the first one that I worked on for his first race for clerk of courts. And, you know, the rest is history, as they say. But really, I think what we're all talking about is that when the passion gets you, it gets you. And it doesn't matter what age you start. And the value that you can give to campaigns is immeasurable. So kudos to all the young people for jumping in, because we need you as well as we need people who are at my age level.
Yes.
So I was going to tell you there was another question.
Yes, please. Yes.
So this might be a little two-part question for Jared. One is just to give an example of the process of strategizing, and then kind of the second part from a different person. What organizations or publications do you follow as a knowledge base for your political strategy?
Well, I'll answer the second part first. I read everything that I possibly can. I read, there's half a dozen good political newsletters that come out most mornings that cover races all across the country, internationally even. Any TV ad that gets put out on any race, either from a candidate or an outside organization, I watch every morning to check out the new ones. There's usually a half dozen every morning, depending on time of year. And I just try to read and soak up as much as I can. I'm a member of the American Association of Political Consultants, which sends around case studies from members that are that have had really interesting, wins. And we just sent one actually to the AAPC. They sent out their membership about issue 7 and campaigning during a pandemic and passing a tax increase during a economic crisis. But I try to expose myself to as much information as possible about the strategies and the arts of campaigning. It's definitely not, there's never a right answer to anything in terms of, figuring out what is a right strategy. Everything is so context dependent, and being able to have a way, like to see the whole chessboard, to understand what district, what the makeup of your district or your state or whatever constituency it is, like understanding the historical context. For instance, as candidates have to campaign in Cincinnati, especially now in the aftermath of some of these protests, understanding the role that the 2001 riots had in shaping the psyche of voters in Hamilton County, and understanding that context, understanding demographic changes, understanding messaging that works, with certain voters, and then understanding the tactics. I mean, there's two pieces of it. There's the big picture strategy, and then there are tactics, which is kind of each building block of how you execute on that strategy. And those change constantly. I mean, we had a pandemic in the middle of our primary that for a lot of our clients, at least in Ohio, that all of the tactics they were using had to be changed and pretty much overnight redeployed. And then there's the third layer of layering over that with budget and the realities of the financial constraints in certain campaigns have. And so, I think it's being able to see the whole board and understand all of those pieces, the tactics, the context, all the strategy, and then also the financial realities. But it's hard. Every situation you're starting from scratch. There's no kind of plug and play. There's no templates of in every situation. If you just do X and Y, you'll hit your goal. Every situation requires kind of starting from square one and making that analysis.
Terrific.
Can I?
So Jared, just as a quick follow-up, if there is any kind of national outlet that you do follow that you could put in the chat that might be an idea for other people, if it's available online or
they're all free. Most of them are free.
Yeah. So if you can just jot a couple of down as you're thinking about them in the chat, and then we can.
Or do you want to do that now, Jared? Because the next question will be coming soon. Or you could send it to me afterwards, and I will include it in our next notes and actions, whichever works best for you.
There are two, and I'm just going to very quickly pull in the links.
Good. Okay.
One is Politico.com does a tip sheet every morning called Morning Score. It usually comes in by 10 a.m. That one's good. It's not as comprehensive as the second one that I read every morning, which is the Daily Kos Morning Digest. That one comes in at 8 a.m. usually, and that's far more comprehensive. But they're super easy to read. They have great links to other things, and if you want to watch every single political ad that's going out across the country in any given day, you can do it from either or both of those tip sheets.
Terrific.
Okay.
Yes.
And Meg Brook had a follow-up question to what you were just talking about. And then the second part of that question, Jared, was an example of developing a process for strategizing. But I think Meg is first.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. And maybe this is related to that question. So I'm used to working on campaigns where it is absolutely key that we target progressive voters, Democrat-leaning voters who are infrequent voters, who are often low income, oftentimes move a lot, so their registration isn't up to date. So I'm just used to being deployed as a canvasser to certain targeted neighborhoods and talking to people one-on-one to increase real a connection with those folks, and helping us build kind of a social, almost a social movement about people like us are really engaging with candidates like these because we share the same concerns, and it does seem to help with turnout. But in my experience, it absolutely relies on face-to-face contact, and it has nothing to do with my network that it reads my Facebook or anything like that. And one of the joys of it is this is not my typical, you know, quote unquote social circle. It's not so, but that has been the key to winning in city races that are important to me with my values. What are we going to do, Jared? Because I'm also too old to risk a lot of. I mean, I can be in public, but I'm not one of these people that's going back to the gym or to the pool. So, what are we going to do to substitute for that kind of contact with this key group of political actors in our city?
Yeah, truthfully, I don't know the answer to that yet. And I think people across the country are still struggling to figure out what the answer to that is. On a big picture level, voters that don't vote or are only sporadic voters have a lot of reasons for not voting. Too busy, or forgot to register, or any number of things. But what you see is the largest common denominator is that they just don't think that their vote matters or that it makes a difference. So what we've seen is this shift, especially starting with like the end of the second Obama term, where it used to be my vote doesn't make a difference, to it doesn't matter because the system is so just inherently screwed up that voting for one party doesn't make a difference. And there's concrete data on how to combat that second piece. If someone doesn't think their vote matters, there's not a ton you can do about that, candidly. I mean, you can show them examples of like issue 7 or Alicia Reese that went into overtime and had to go, have recanvassing and potential recounts. But if you were talking to folks who are sporadic voters and you're hearing that, the biggest reason is that they just don't think it makes a difference, is you have to be able to connect candidates and causes to their own personal life.
Right.
Most people, especially the folks that you're discussing, are on some kind of aid, whether it's Medicare, Medicaid, SNAP, or even just like, they're on disability, or they're on, some sort of a form of aid and support that they don't connect with the policymakers that they can be voting for. I mean, it's like, how many times do we see the photo of people protesting Obamacare with the sign, "Keep your government hands off my Medicaid"? We have not done a good job of connecting why candidates and policies matter to folks individually. When we talk about healthcare, we talk about it in the abstract. When we talk about trade, we talk about it in the abstract. When we talk about the social safety net, we talk about it in the abstract. And for sporadic voters, we have to do a better job of clearly drawing a straight line from the candidates and the policies and the contrast of the candidates running for certain things directly to them. And that's proven to be the number one way to turn a sporadic voter into a regular voter.
Terrific.
And how does that work during a pandemic? You're just still like really talking to each other about how do we engage?
We're all figuring that out as
we don't know yet.
Yeah, we don't know. But we are all figuring out as we go. There are a ton of primaries this Tuesday, June 2nd. So a lot of primaries that have been in March and April were kicked back to June 2nd. If you remember, Ohio was originally, we were told we were going to be on June 2nd. So this Tuesday, we have a lot of primaries where a lot of theories are going to be tested. And so from a purely academic perspective, we're going to see, candidates that use certain techniques or tactics have success or not have success. And then we'll be able to see which ones worked in these primaries and hopefully be able to replicate them in November if it's still necessary.
Terrific. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Mary Carol.
Okay, just just the other follow-up, Jared. Thank you for all of that. I don't know if this got answered specifically, but just give an example of the process that you use when you are strategizing for a candidate. You've used that word, and so Susan, am I asking that question correctly? Okay.
You know, it's not kind of a one-time thing where you start working with a candidate and you strategize and then you go. It's constantly ongoing and reevaluating and adapting to the landscape. I mean, I think the first place you start is like getting an understanding of what is the battlefield that you are fighting on? Who is your opponent? How many votes do you need? Who's going to show up to vote? What are your own strengths and vulnerabilities? What are your opponent's strengths and vulnerabilities? Just like getting a sense of the very basic stuff, and then being able to find and execute on certain tactics that work. You have part of the reason, candidates and causes will hire consultants and strategists is because, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We've seen certain things that work and don't work in certain places. I can tell you, that we worked with a candidate for Secretary of State in Oregon in 2016. We were convinced he was going to win a statewide election entirely based on billboards in the state of Oregon. And that's obviously a tactic more so than a strategy, but the problem is the tactic didn't feed up to a strategy that made any sense. And so as you're developing certain tactics, usually candidates or campaign managers or other folks are going to have specific ideas on tactics. Many of them will be good ideas, many of them won't be. The question, how you sort through it, is you come back to an overall strategy that you develop. Who you need to have vote, what kind of percentage of people you want to have show up in certain areas, and does each tactic that's being proposed feed back into that strategy in a way that is helpful to achieving the overall goal. And so, for instance, our candidate in Oregon, Democratic state, he was running a Democratic year. All he needed to do was essentially communicate with Democrats and make sure they voted in the Secretary of State's race. He got persuaded that billboards were a tactic that were going to feed into that strategy. Well, it didn't, and he lost. He became the first Republican in 28 years, or first Democrat in 28 years to lose a statewide election in Oregon. And so, the strategy is an ongoing process. You're constantly seeing movement in who's a likely voter. People are registering to vote. People are moving. And so it's a moving target, but understanding the key concepts and that are making up the landscape, and then making sure that as you're thinking through tactics and budgeting, that it's feeding back up to the core strategy is going to help you accomplish what you need to in your path to victory.
Terrific. Yes. Yes.
Okay, there's still two more questions.
Okay, let's take a live one, and then we'll go back to the
Okay.
chat ones. Is there someone who's right at the tip to be asking personally? Antoinette.
Well, you referenced this earlier, Jared, about the finances, the money. Any campaign needs money. And so here we are with 40 million people who have applied for unemployment, and or not other nonprofit organizations and churches, et cetera, that have closed their doors and are dependent on money. And we have a big election depending on money. So just like the canvassing deal, what do you do when you have an impoverished population now, recently impoverished, and you need money?
Yeah, it is hard right now. There are a lot of candidates running, and the pool of people willing to contribute is actually shrinking now for all those reasons, Antoinette, that you mentioned. And so you're competing for the same dollars. That's just part of a smaller pie. I will say, and I don't think this will surprise anyone necessarily, is that the folks who put in substantial dollars to campaigns haven't quite been as affected financially yet by the pandemic. And so where you're seeing the drop off is on grassroots fundraising as opposed to the high dollar fundraising. The high dollar fundraising is being impacted because high dollar events aren't happening as much anymore. And so you'll see, like when you have a great surrogate, who would normally be coming to town to help raise money for a Kate Schroeder or something like that. Well, now he's over Zoom, and while Zoom is great, obviously, it doesn't have the same impact from a fundraising perspective. And from a grassroots perspective, when you're raising money via email or via digital and it's in small dollar increments, yeah, people are making that calculation a little bit more about their own, economic circumstances, but also, what you've seen a little bit of is people who look at the response to the pandemic and the fallout and say, wow, this is more important than ever. But I think big picture, yes, fundraising is hard right now. All of our clients are struggling a little bit. Certain clients are struggling to higher degrees than others. But I think especially for higher profile races, federal races, you're still seeing an okay clip. It's the down ballot races and local races that just are just going to struggle for probably the foreseeable future. And then you have to revise your budgets downward and make tough decisions about what tactics you're going to either cut or reduce. And, that's a tough thing to do, especially when you kind of made the calculation, okay, we need 1,000 points of TV to win this race. Well, now we can't afford 1,000 points of TV. We can only afford 500. Is that still worth it? Or should we just deploy all that money into more mail or digital? And those are the kind of conversations we're having with our clients right now. And it's tough. And I don't think this will be the last kind of round of cuts we have to make in campaign budgets. I think we'll probably do more of it as we get closer.
Yeah, right. Mary Carol, let's go back and forth. There's another one in the chat.
Okay, yes. Jared, you mentioned this question has to do with what you were talking about, understanding the landscape, and that the candidates can't always choose what the community they're trying to serve cares about. And so the question is, how do you get buy-in from candidates that don't get to understand that they don't get to choose what the voters care about, but you have to go where the voters are and reflect their concerns? Like, how do you handle that tension or that movement from a candidate's own perspective toward, yeah, but we have to pay attention to what are the people asking for?
It's mostly a problem with first-time candidates, I will say. If you've run before, you've either lost and learned that lesson the hard way, or you've won, and that's because you adapted to it pretty quickly and understand the reality. For first-time candidates, if your campaign has the ability to do polling, that really helps. Polling is a good kind of eye opener for people to see what issues people care about and are persuasive. If you're a first time candidate, you don't have resources for polling, you can fall into this echo chamber where you have your Facebook feed, your Twitter feed, and you see the same kind of, feedback that you get from people on a certain issue. And you can kind of get removed a little bit from the rank and file voters and what they care about. So you have to overcome that. It's hard. I mean, especially right now when you can't go out to public events and be talking to people at church festivals or talking to people at community councils and be kind of getting that direct feedback from the rank and file. I try to find as much data as I can. If I can't be persuasive just by explaining the concept of it, that's on me. That means I haven't done my job well. So I try to find as much data as I can to back up the points I try to make, to be able to see trends nationally, to be able to show other local polling that maybe we have access to, but our campaign can't afford to do on their own, and be able to show it. But at the end of the day, it's on me. And again, we're talking most of that first time candidates here that haven't had that opportunity before. And then also, look, I will be honest about this. Some candidates, their job is not to win. Some candidates who are running in gerrymandered districts that are so tough for Democrats, their job isn't necessarily to win. They can be successful as a campaign. If you're running in, a tough Republican district, maybe your job is just to turn out Democratic votes that live in your district, because it'll help, candidates that are running in overlapping areas or running in that, statewide in that state. And so then maybe you're not necessarily trying to convince them that they have to care about what voters care about. They just have to care about what Democrats care about and mobilize Democrats. We see candidates every cycle who make an impact running in a race that's unwinnable. And then those candidates helped the candidates up the ballot or down the ballot, as the case may be. And then those candidates who did a really good job go on and run for something that is a little bit more winnable. And at that point, they'll have gotten a sense of like, okay, I now know the ropes a little bit. So, it's a little bit different for each candidate and depending on what you're running for and whether it's competitive primary, competitive general, or non-competitive general. And, just understanding kind of the lay of the land. This is a long answer to that question, I suppose. But it's, like I said, usually for first-time candidates, usually you have some data to kind of reinforce it. If not, it's my job to find it as best I can. And kind of make it a clear kind of binary choice of here's what voters care about. We can talk about these issues and lead on these issues or not, rather than making it some sort of muddled mess in the middle.
Through analysis, Jared, do you determine how many votes, how often does this happen? You want to determine how many votes this candidate needs, and perhaps even more specific to what parts of the district or the county or whatever the state it needs to be. How do you do that, and how do you do that?
Yeah, you do, and it's an imperfect science, but there's a lot of historical data that you can use. You look at what we call like elections. So if you're running in 2020, you want to look at 2016, you want to look at 2012, you want to look at similar elections. If you're running in a primary, you want to look at a primary that was similar. So for instance, in 2016, for the vast majority of the primary, we had a competitive presidential primary. So you don't want to look at 2012 because Democrats didn't have a competitive primary at the presidential level in 2012, but we did in 2008. And so you want to look at those kind of similar elections and study voter behavior. This is all publicly available data, so you don't have to be, any sort of political insider, to get access to any of this. It's all available mostly on the Board of Elections or Secretary of State's website. For candidates and campaigns that have a little bit more in terms of resources, you do what's called modeling, where you essentially, you work with a firm that goes out and does basically 10,000 calls and just gets demographic data and likelihood to vote. And you can make a map of everyone in your district because you have enough samples at that point to be statistically significant, where you can make predictions and say, okay, in my case, white male, 28 years old, lives in this part of town, is X likely to vote. And you do that for every voter in your district. And you can essentially make a model, and then, you 50% plus one, right? And, it's good to model that 52% just to give yourself a little bit of cushion. And, kind of work backwards from there. But it's hard because, as we know, past behavior is not always the best indicator of future behavior. And so, you're making some assumptions in that data that sometimes get borne out to be not true. And as, there are massive, let's call it realignments in politics. You see changes that you couldn't have otherwise predict. So for instance, Hillary Clinton won Blue Ash, which is my hometown. And I can tell you that it is very rare for a Democrat to win Blue Ash. And that's hard to forecast looking on previous results. And so you have to be able to kind of take the previous historical data and then weight it against trends that you're seeing in real time and that you're looking at prospectively. And so that is certainly an art, not a science. And it's an imperfect one at that, but you're always kind of recalibrating that as you go, for sure.
Yeah, cool. Mary Carol, is there another question in there?
Yeah, there is. Let me just do one quick follow-up to what Jared was just talking about, because in Charmaine's race, we did not have money, or we didn't feel like we did, to do polling, but we became aware that our opponent did polling. And so, Jared, I don't know whether this is true to read anything into it. They may have gotten some data that helped them with messaging, but we never publicly saw any result of that polling that says oh my gosh, the opponent has an 80% favorability in the county or whatever. So we kind of took that as a sign that, oops, maybe that polling did not show up very well for Charmaine's candidate or opponent, because they never publicized anything apparently. So is that even a fair assumption, or do you think they just did it to kind of get messaging, and which obviously did not work either?
Yeah, no, I truthfully don't know, because if I'd been on that side of things, I wouldn't have done that if I were them. So it's hard for me to kind of like put the pieces back together in terms of what I think they were thinking.
Yeah.
Polling just generally is always a snapshot in time. So the shelf life on it is actually not very useful. Polling is very rarely predictive. What you can do in polling that is helpful long term is test messaging, test ideas. You can even do a qualitative research, do focus groups where you test ads, where you test even intonation and voice to see if it impacts people. So if you're doing a poll right now in May that shows Joe Biden, winning in Ohio by 4 points, that doesn't mean that Joe Biden's obviously going to win in November by 4 points. But if you do that poll and also show what moves people, if they're convinced by Joe Biden's economic message or, his message about trade, that can be predictive in terms of influencing what messaging you're using in Ohio from May through November. And so, polls that just show top lines aren't very helpful. I mean, in the case for Jim Deal, it ended up being predictive to a certain extent. He only got about 38% of the vote, or 30% of the vote, like his poll showed he was getting. But it was a poll that showed him being tied with Charmaine, and he lost by 40 points. So if they tested messaging for not obvious to me they acted on it, or if there was anything they could act on, but polls that just show top lines, I would be very wary
of,
from an election.
Yeah. Well, the other question, there are two questions in the chat that are similar. What is your critique of Amy McGrath's ads?
So I know Amy McGrath's ad maker very well, and so her congressional ads in 2018 were amazing. The only reason that race was competitive is because she broke through with her ads. I think when we're talking about Amy McGrath's ads, we really like to kind of get granular about it, because there's ads the campaign puts out, and there's ads that super PACs that are supporting her put out, and they're obviously not coordinating. And so the campaign ads I think are good. If there's an ad in particular that someone wants to, she's done a handful of ads. I think most of them are good. Some of them I think are okay. They're none that I think are bad. But there's an ad in particular that someone had in mind. I can't address it, but I think big picture, her ads are pretty good.
So Susan and Nikki both asked the same question. I don't know if you had a particular ad in mind or if you had a question about it.
It's the recent one where she's saying and responding to the attack that she's the farthest left person in Kentucky, and sort of coming back on that smear tactic that Mitch McConnell did.
Yeah, on a strategic level, I don't love that. I don't like the idea, like I mentioned earlier, of amplifying and repeating your opponent's attacks on you with your own dollars, no less, on TV. I think where Amy's best is telling her story. She's got an unbelievable story, and when she launched her campaign for Senate, she launched a great video contrasting her with McConnell about service to the country and how she's been in the military and how he's just been getting rich in the U.S. Senate, and she should be sticking with that. She has an incredibly uphill battle because it is Kentucky, and they do not elect Democrats at the federal level. They just don't, and they've made it a lot harder to elect Democrats even at a statewide level. But I think she should be getting back to the message that she had originally, which I think was by far the most effective.
Okay. Nikki, did you have
the same
one?
because that was the same ad that I saw, and it seemed to run either generally after McConnell ad.
Yeah.
He came on, and then that ad would follow.
I don't mind that strategy. Like all of these buys are public, so you can tell when when your opponent's TV spots are going to air, like which programs. So I don't mind the idea of like chasing his spots. What I don't love is it makes it even less of a good idea to be amplifying his attacks if people.
Yeah.
Repeat it.
Who has a question or comment? Antoinette.
Yes, so as a new learner in this arena, I guess I'm hearing you say that it would be better to just let his negative ad run and then follow that ad with her positive message about who she is and what benefits she brings to citizens, et cetera. Is that how you deal with it?
Yeah, it doesn't have to necessarily just be positive. I mean, I think as we all know, there's plenty of negative content that you could run against Mitch McConnell. In fact, the Lincoln Project put out an ad yesterday or earlier this week about Mitch McConnell. I thought was incredibly effective. So it doesn't have to just be positive, but by responding to an attack by repeating it, you're not only amplifying it, you're giving it credibility whether you realize it or not. If you're responding to an attack by repeating it, people are hearing that, even if they're only hearing it subconsciously as, wow, this is serious enough that she felt like she had to respond.
Yeah.
If you're Mitch McConnell and you're attacking Amy McGrath, again, it's a good sign for Amy McGrath. But the second thing is, you have a good message that works. So you've ostensibly told it and know exactly who it works with. And you then have enough substance that you can draw a contrast with Mitch McConnell where you can still accomplish the dual goal of raising your favorability, lowering McConnell's favorability, but not have to stoop to the level of repeating and attacking you. So they have polling that I'm sure, I will never have access to that maybe says everything I just said was wrong. But like in terms of, just kind of basic brass tacks politicking, I don't think that was the right call.
Constance.
I'm sure all of you, when you hear stuff like that, you get so angry. And like maybe rather than saying like, Mitch McConnell thinks I'm too liberal, like she should just come out and say, Mitch McConnell thinks serving my country is too liberal. And so be it. I am proud to be liberal. Like really pull it on, like I'm working for this country. What's Mitch McConnell doing?
Yeah, and look, people, when we win elections, it's because we often break through the liberal conservative fault lines that are so often the case. And if you're going to win in Kentucky, if the election's about who's liberal and who's conservative, Amy McGrath has no chance. Where you have to be willing to adapt is to kind of break out of that dogma and be willing to say, look, this is about service. Amy McGrath, I've served my country in the military. I'm a mom. I serve my community. McConnell has been in D.C. for 40-something years, and his net worth has increased 100-fold. Who's he serving? He's not serving Kentucky. He's serving himself. And that you have to be able to break the liberal. Exactly why McConnell is calling her liberal, but by accepting that premise and responding to that ad and that specific attack, you're playing into his strategy.
Yes. Who's next? I'll ask one. This came up recently with Biden, Jared, and that is the dynamic or tension between the finance side, the donation side, and the field side. And Plouffe in his book really mentioned that as well. That was a big concern. And his claim is that every time that tug of war within the campaign between the financial side getting donations and the field side came up, his claim was every time Obama chose the field side. Whenever in doubt, choose the field side. And I thought that, but it's even come up in our activist group because Biden at this time is, inundating us to support his campaign, and he doesn't really have an active Ohio I mean, there's a person that we're going to meet with in Bold New Democracy coming in for our meeting next Tuesday, who is a Biden field guy, but he's off. He's got a big territory. He's not specific to Southwest Ohio by any means, but he's going to come in just to bring a little balance that there is a field side. How do you handle that tension between the financial side and the field side?
Well, I will say that Barack Obama had the luxury of being able to side with the field side because he didn't really have to worry about money. He had a $1 billion re-election campaign in 2012. I think that tension actually becomes less and less the further down the ballot. Yeah. Whether you're running for Congress or countywide or a judge position, you're not raising enough money that you need to. That you're only focusing all your time on that and not being able to do both. So I think where we've seen this fault line develop in Democratic politics is disavowing in-person fundraisers like Elizabeth Warren did, disavowing PAC contributions, not just corporate PAC contributions, but all PAC contributions, and then disavowing super PACs. Here's my take on this, and this might be an unpopular opinion, and I'm fully ready to acknowledge that. The Republicans don't leave anything on the table in terms of money. We should not be unilaterally disarming. Our job is to beat Republicans, and we need everything we can to do that. I think Elizabeth Warren made a tactical mistake in disavowing in-person fundraisers. Now, none of us are doing in-person fundraisers right now because of the pandemic, but raising money is in and of itself not a dirty or immoral thing. There are plenty of people who give money to campaigns, whether it's $5 or $5,000, who aren't doing it for nefarious reasons. And honestly, like most lobbyists and PACs who give money also aren't doing it for nefarious reasons. I just gave it to one of my staff. I have a check in my office for $500 from First Energy, which is the energy company in Cleveland, that they gave to Bridget Kelly, who's a state rep. Bridget just got done voting against First Energy's bailout. They got a $1 billion bailout from the state. And Bridget not only voted against it, she was an active campaigner who votes against it. They sent her a $500 check, and you know what? I'm gonna cash that check and put it in her account so that she can support candidates running up and down it. When Jared Brown was our client, Jared is the ranking member on the banking committee. Okay, so he was in charge of overseeing Wells Fargo, overseeing J.P. Morgan Chase, overseeing Goldman Sachs. And Jared had a policy that I think is absolutely the right policy, and no one will ever accuse Jared Brown of ever straying from his morals. So I feel very confident that this is coming from a good policy. Jared said, the best way I can show I'm not corrupt, I take everyone's money and vote against them. And so Jared Brown would take Wells Fargo money, he would take Goldman Sachs money, he would take money from energy companies, and he would go vote against them for every single thing they did. And you know what? That'll allow Jared Brown to go beat Jim Renacci by 8 points and keep a Democratic seat in the U.S. Senate. And I think when we unilaterally disarm for the sake of showing our values, all we've done is tie one hand around our back and make it harder for us to do what we want, which is win. We can't affect any change unless we policy is made by 435 members of Congress and 100 senators, and we got to win those seats. And we win those seats by raising money and making sure that we absolutely have what we need to fight and win those races. So when I look at money in politics, I don't look at it as like, it's an inherently dirty thing. It can become that way if you let it influence you. It could become that way if you let it, shade the kind of votes you take and the policies you advocate for. But it doesn't have to be that way. I think unilateral disarming is a big mistake.
Thank you. Yeah, that is counter to some of us that are working.
I know it is.
Yeah.
But we like countering. We have to get in there and wrestle with the bears and not just take a pure line. And I like your Jared example too, Mary Carol.
So 2 things. Would everybody mute if you're not speaking, because people are getting a little bit of feedback. So that's one thing. The other question is, you talked about the Lincoln Project, which I agree. I think their ads are fabulous. So the question is, what can Democratic strategists learn from those ads?
Yeah, great question. Every single one of their ads has been awesome so far. So if you haven't had a chance to check out their stuff, and for those who don't know, the Lincoln Project is a group of very, very intelligent, well-regarded Republican strategists who hate the Trump administration, hate the president, and have raised money to create this. It's basically a super PAC that is entirely meant to message to Republicans and persuade Republicans to not vote for Trump, although they started doing it with Mitch McConnell, as I mentioned, which is awesome.
Yeah, what a great name for the group too. I think the Lincoln Project.
Phenomenal name. Because they're not Democrats, they're Republicans.
Yeah.
And they're Republicans who feel like they should be the party of Lincoln. Now, I think it's ridiculous for Republicans to call themselves the party of Lincoln in the first place, but neither here nor there. So, what can Democratic strategists and ad makers learn? I think what they're doing is a great job of actually getting back to that same point I was making before, which is finding out what people actually care about, and connecting these things back to them. Like, people don't care about, what if Mitch McConnell is, doing things that are Republican orthodoxy, because they expect Republicans to do Republican things. It's not news. It's not interesting. What they do care about is a guy who's enriched himself and been a career politician, when the Republican base right now is all about draining the swamp and all about, trying to eliminate people that are what they consider part of the establishment. And so they're cutting against the grain in terms of what we see as a typical kind of campaign in a box, where you say, I'm fighting for healthcare, I'm fighting for, more access to more resources for people. The Republicans are advocating for closed borders and, less trade and cuts to entitlements. They've kind of broken through those fault lines, and they're now kind of turning these things on its head, and showing that McConnell is not truly conservative and he's not truly, doing what he said he was going to do. Instead, he's gotten himself rich and he's become, for lack of a better term, a swamp creature. They do a really good job, and Republicans are better at this in general than we are. They write better ads. They write better messaging documents in general.
Why is that?
We have moral barriers that they don't. It's just the simplest way. There are things that we can say that would allow us to win more Republican votes that just defy all of our morals. I'll just give you one quick example. Right now, Republicans traffic in fear. They're the party of fear. We've never really done that, and I'm glad that we don't. But they can convince an out-of-work blue-collar white person in rural Ohio that Mexicans are the reason they don't have a job. Is it true? It's almost never true. But they offer them fear. What do we offer them? We don't offer them anything, or at least nothing that at least resonates. There are things we could do that violate all of our morals. So for instance, natural gas extraction is a big issue in Southeast Ohio. It's an area where Ted Strickland was a congressman there for a long time. He won it when he ran for governor in 2006, and now we just get destroyed out there. What could we do to win those voters back? They're not totally lost. They're not totally deplorable. We could be in favor of natural gas extraction. We could be in favor of a dividend like Alaska has, that for all of the dollars that come out of a natural gas extraction, we're going to send it back in a dividend to people. That violates our morals in terms of the environment, and violates our morals in terms of personal property rights. And so we're not going to do it. But Republicans don't mind doing that. And so that allows them to write better ads, quite candidly. And also fear and sex are the two best things that you can use to persuade people. And they use fear. We just don't. We use hope. And Barack Obama obviously did that expertly, but the threshold's way higher for success on that.
Wow, that is good. This is a deep dive, 90 minutes, Jared, and you handle it so well. You have such good energy. We're down to our last.
I've had 2 cups of coffee, so that helps.
Yeah, good. And you have So much good things
Sorry.
to share. So we have about 3 or 4 more minutes, and then we'll do our closing. Mary Carol.
So one point of clarification, the question is natural gas extraction the same as fracking?
Yes, same thing.
Great. And who has a question or comment?
The chat is clear.
Oh, good. Thank you, Mary Carol. Chuck.
Unmute, Chuck.
Unmute, Chuck.
A friend of mine who had a friend involved in politics, and this guy said, Republicans go too far, Democrats don't go far enough. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's a succinct way of saying it. Yeah.
Yeah. What's your sense, Jared, of those of us that are grassroots activists? We're independent of the party or with candidates in campaigns, but we're aligned with many based on values, you know? And so do you think how do you picture us strategizing? Do you think us even thinking in those terms, or should we rely on kind of the professionals like yourself? What's your picture of us being seeing ourselves as strategists?
Yeah, do not rely on us as the professionals, because we'll get it wrong just as much as we get it right. And so none of us have all the answers. And quite frankly, the real work gets done on the level that you guys are at. And so don't rely on the professional strategy. What I would say is, to the extent that you work with, campaigns, understand, what are your goals for, maybe it's turnout. What are your goals for, certain geographic areas, and then figure out, okay, what can we be doing to mobilize people, to engage people? Like, I know there's a lot of West Siders on this call that probably got involved because they felt like they were the only Democrat in their neighborhood. Well, obviously we now know, it's not true. But let's say, okay, I live in Green Township, and I live in Green Township Precinct A. The Democratic Party has precinct executives whose job it is to mobilize their precinct, and people on this call might be precinct executives in themselves. But even if you're not, like, find different areas and say, okay, there are 100 registered Democrats here, and maybe only 60 voted in the last election. How can we get that closer to 90 or 100? And make it more about values and turnout rather than about candidates or the party.
Yeah, right. Yes,
Yeah.
Nikki.
This is a question about one of the messages in Pluff's book was the volunteers are really the heart of driving this, the grassroots. And when one tries to, like I have, find out more about the Biden campaign, they don't want to talk to you unless you want to give them money. I am not giving the Democratic Party any more money. And I don't know what message you can get through to, even all their literature that is less extensive now. But I just think of all the trees that are being wasted with their surveys, that they don't listen to anything that I fill out. I just don't feel they're paying attention to what things I am concerned about. And I don't know how you get that message to the higher ups of the Democratic Party. That I don't know if you're familiar with the Wilderness podcast,
Yep.
but that was a young fellow that I then learned about. And it's like they just need to move over and let some more people in touch with the people have some say in how they're running their party.
No, I totally agree with you. And that's why I say strategists don't have all the right answers, because, there's so much fewer of us than there are of activists and folks who are putting in the effort on the ground. With the Biden campaign, I will just say, I want Joe Biden to be elected president. I will do everything.
I do too.
I will do everything I can to make it to be sure he's elected. Having said that, that campaign's got a lot of issues right now, and it's stuff that exactly what you're articulating, that the outreach just isn't there where it needs to be, and certainly, like, they have a $200 million deficit they have to make up relative to the Trump campaign. So I understand the focus on finance, but Richard, to the point you were making earlier, you have to defer to the field in when you're running for president and over the fine. The money will come. He'll have all the money he needs. He's got to be, that campaign's got to be doing more with folks like you, with organizations like this one, especially in a place like Ohio. There's a lot of issues, and I'll just say, like, if it's at all helpful to know, if it's any solace, like in conversations that I'm a part of with decision makers in the campaign, that message has been relayed multiple times to them.
Oh, good.
So,
terrific.
Because that's certainly not the first time I've heard it. So like Nikki, for every comment that you've just made, I've heard 10 that are almost identical. And I don't work for the Biden campaign, but we just happen to have access to some decision makers. And I just want you to know that, like, that is not falling on deaf ears. Whether or not they do anything about it, I can't.
Yeah.
But what I can do is relay it, and I have, and I'll continue to.
So we are at the end of our time. Mary Carol, yes.
So this may be a question for you, Richard.
Yes.
The question is, why was the book Political Strategy and Tactics posted in our email for this event? Just wondering. And then, Jared, to you, if we ever figure out how to reach the occasional voter that Meg Bruck was talking about, let us know, because there are a lot of people interested in that.
Yes.
That's the end of the chat.
Okay, good. Thank you. And I don't recall I remember seeing the political strategy and tactics, but I don't know why that image was. I just chose the image because I thought it was related to this topic. So I have no book understanding, or I haven't read that book to know. And any closing with that for you, Jared?
No, I don't know that one either. So, but I'd be interested. Like I said, I read everything that I can. So
yeah, good. Yeah. So the Bold New Democracy next Tuesday this Tuesday at 7, and the Rich Wilkins from the Biden Field Guy, now not a donation guy, a contribution guy, is coming. Field Guy is going to be on with us for the first 30 minutes, and I'm trying to get him to come to the Indivisible meeting, which occurs on Wednesday at 10. Every Wednesday at 10, the Indivisible meeting arises. And Jared, this has been fabulous. I can see why you were so highly recommended. And of course, getting to know you along the campaign worlds has been a pleasure anyway. So thank you. The recording will be available in the next invitation for Bold New Democracy and Indivisible. And then, of course, in the notes and actions after that, because I think there's a lot of important things that you've added to our work coming up. So thank you. Let's give a hand, in the old days.
Thanks, Jared.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for the invite. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, thank you.
Good job.
I'm going to stop the recording.